Thank you so much for joining us today. This is ADAA's Ask the Author Q&A, Resolving OCD with Dr. Frederick Aardema. Now, I'm very pleased to present our moderator for today, Dr. Diana Robbins. Dr. Robbins is a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of Child Psych San Diego, a thriving private practice dedicated to empowering children, teens, and young adults with anxiety, OCD, tic disorders, and related conditions. Dr. Robbins is a passionate supporter and provider of inference-based cognitive behavior therapy and serves as a consultant in this innovative approach. She integrates ICBT into her work alongside evidence-based treatments such as exposure and response prevention, supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions, and comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics. Additionally, she is a graduate of the Behavior Therapy Training Institute. Welcome, Dr. Robbins. Thank you so much for moderating today's webinar. I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
It's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us today for a special author Q&A featuring Dr. Frederick Aardema. Dr. Aardema is a clinical psychologist, researcher, and professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Addiction at University of Montreal. He has dedicated nearly 3 decades advancing the understanding and treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, pioneering innovative approaches to help individuals overcome the disorder. As the co-creator of inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, or ICBT, he is at the forefront of its ongoing development, validation, and dissemination, providing individuals with OCD a novel and highly effective evidence-based treatment option. His research focuses on reasoning, imagination, and feared self-perceptions in OCD, offering profound insights into how the disorder develops and persists. In his role as director of the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Clinical Study Center at the Montreal Mental Health University Institute Research Center, Dr. Aardema leads cutting-edge clinical trials that compare ICBT with other approaches such as exposure and response prevention, or ERP. And whether you're a clinician, someone with lived experience, or just curious about OCD, I know you're in for a rich and insightful discussion today. Dr. Aardema, we're so pleased to have you here today to talk about ICBT and your new books, Resolving OCD, Understanding Your Obsessional Experience, and Resolving OCD, Advanced Strategies for Overcoming Obsessional Doubt. We have a lot of questions that were sent in advance for this Q&A today. And since we're so excited to speak with you, I'd love to dive in.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
To start us off, I'm curious about what inspired you to write these books and why did you entitle them Resolving OCD?
Yeah, thanks for that question. A number of reasons. I think first and foremost, that we're inspired to provide an alternative option for those with OCD. Many people still feel stuck after applying standard treatments like exposure and response prevention or traditional CBT for that matter. Because even though ERP can be effective, it does not work for everyone. And also not everybody can do exposure. So alternatives are needed, and inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, or ICBT in short, is what these books are based on, which is an alternative approach to the treatment of OCD without a need to directly confront fears and without using exposure. Instead, it directly addresses the reasoning process behind OCD. So it's primarily a cognitive approach. And this is also why I chose the title, Resolving OCD. ICBT is not about tolerating or managing uncertainty. It's about eliminating obsessional doubt altogether through insight primarily and realization. So it emphasizes resolution of obsessional doubt, not acceptance or tolerating intrusions. Then a third reason would be accessibility. Number of therapists providing ICBT is growing in the US especially, but it's not yet widely available, and not everybody can afford a private therapist either. So many people are still left without access to treatment. And the books offer a way to access ICBT independently in a self-guided manner for people. Another reason was time for an update. Last treatment manual was published over 15 years ago. And there have been many new research and clinical refinements in the model since then. And the series, Resolving OCD, integrates these models and techniques. And finally, I wanted also a series or a book with a dual purpose, so that it can both be used inside and outside of treatment. It's designed as self-help, but it can also function as a workbook for clients and therapists to use together. So it was a pretty big project. It took several years to write, but I have high hopes that it can help many of those with OCD. Not everyone, I'm sure, as everyone is different, but we definitely need other options in the treatment of OCD.
And I'm so glad they were written, and they are so thorough and comprehensive. And I love that it's a hopeful message to people who are suffering from this condition that you can resolve OCD. I'm going to move on to our next question.
Sure.
ICBT is clearly helping so many people with OCD find hope and recovery. I'm interested in one of the questions we got from the audience is, how is inference-based CBT for OCD different from typical CBT for OCD? And are there studies showing it to be more effective?
I think the fundamental difference is that traditional CBT treats OCD like a phobia, as if it is a phobia. So it focuses, and that means that it focuses on exaggerated reactions to an obsession, to an intrusion, also in the form of appraisals, how the person interprets it, the anxiety that follows, and the compulsions that follow. That's what it means when you approach OCD from a phobic model of development. And the obsession itself is often viewed as just a random intrusive thought, which has no importance in itself in our understanding of OCD. And little attention is given to how the obsession actually originated. So ICBT does things differently. It focuses on the obsession itself and also on how it was formed, particularly the reasoning process that led to this obsessional doubt, not just the reactions to it. And instead it views obsessions as doubts that occur when somebody disconnects from their senses, what they can actually see or feel or sense, and then get absorbed into an imagined possibility instead. So the focus, because of that, the focus of the treatment is also very different. The goal of ICBT is not to confront fear in order to overcome it. Instead, it aims to resolve the obsessional doubt at its source. So once the obsession dissolves, also everything else that follows from that naturally will fall away, right? So it's a cognitive approach, not a behavioral approach. It's far less focused on behavior, doesn't rely on exposure, and there is also no need to confront feared situations to tolerate this stress. Instead, treatment would or involves identifying and addressing reasoning and imaginative distortion that lead to these obsessional doubts. Now, second part of your question, in terms of effectiveness, research shows that ICBT is similarly effective to ERP-based treatments. We've done a fairly large number of trials by now, involving a total of around 700 participants. These trials have been conducted at my own laboratory and as well as abroad independently. So similar effectiveness, but at the same time, we find ICBT is more acceptable for people, and it's also easier to tolerate. So it tends to provoke far less distress than ERP, for example, exposure. So it may be particularly well suited for those who are too afraid to engage in exposure, by offering a gentler, yet at the same time equally effective way towards recovery, right? But regardless of whether you are too afraid to engage with ERP, clinical trials have shown it to be effective, so it's a good alternative for anybody who's looking for something different.
That's wonderful that we have options, right? Because one treatment isn't always suitable for everybody. And I love that we have a
Exactly.
different way of approaching it.
And people may also respond differently, right? In these trials, we
Mhm.
also always assume that everybody responds similarly to the treatments. And it's just group-based analysis. You compare one group with another, so you're dealing with averages, you know. But what trials often also don't take into account that maybe one treatment may have different effects for another person, you know. That's why there's also no such thing as treatment failure. You don't fail at treatment, you know. It just means often that a treatment was not a good fit for you. You know?
Right. I'm going to move on to our next question. We got a lot of questions about different types of OCD themes. There are lots of themes. We talk about existential OCD, sexual orientation OCD, sensory motor OCD, contamination, just to name a few. What kinds of OCD themes is ICBT particularly effective in treating?
It's effective across themes. We don't find differences in themes. It's also something that you don't look at in great detail in trials because of the power that is involved. But in our studies and where we have looked at subtypes, it works similarly for all what we call subtypes, right? At the same time, I should say, ICBT does not really rely on subtyping. It doesn't divide OCD by themes. Conversationally, that makes sense. And obviously, when you talk to a person, you talk about the content of obsessions. But in the model itself doesn't focus on themes as much, but rather it focuses on the common processes that drives all forms of OCD, regardless of theme. So, and what all these themes share and what the focus of ICBT is obsessional doubt. It's not focused on real uncertainty, but imagined possibilities that are treated as real. So the topic or theme may vary from person to person, but the reasoning process, according to ICBT, is always the same. And the different themes in reality just reflect different areas of life. And you can even question whether there is a such thing as a subtype of OCD. You know, many ways, obsessions and obsessional doubts, they represent human imagination, which is limitless to start with, right? So, and that's also why often OCD appears to be so varied, you know, but the structure is always the same. And ICBT addresses the core mechanisms of what leads to obsessional doubt, right? So, and this is why ICBT theoretically, but also empirically, seems to work for every different subtype.
That's encouraging that this approach is flexible and able to address whatever a person's theme might be. Right. And I think a lot of people talk about the whack-a-mole sort of thing, and this is getting to kind of more the core.
Right. If you address the underlying process, then in principle, it should apply to different themes, as well as hopefully address this problem of the OCD popping up in new themes over time. Right.
So going into some of the details, ICBT talks a lot about obsessional doubts. So what exactly is obsessional doubt, and why does ICBT aim to address it? I think you alluded to that a little earlier, why it's an important target.
Right. Yes. Obsessional doubt is really like a core feature of OCD, according to ICBT, and applies to all forms of OCD, like I referred to. And it always starts with doubt. Symptoms always start with doubt. So it's not just uncertainty, it's the act of doubting that something might be wrong. And you see that throughout OCD. And often this doubting occurs without evidence. The person reasons their way towards it. Like, for example, that they may be dangerous, or that they might be contaminated, or that they may have forgotten to do something important. So it's not random. And an obsessional doubt in ICBT is really a conclusion, or what we call an inference, that a person reaches through reasoning. And again, according to ICBT, this occurs as the result of distorted reasoning and imaginative processes that are part of having OCD. And the doubt is taken seriously because the reasoning behind it makes it seem valid, you know. And so we address this doubt in ICBT by looking at how it is generated for each person, and the reasons and the story, the narrative as we call it, behind obsessional doubt is often idiosyncratic. It's different for everyone, but the processes behind it that lead to obsessional doubt, that make the doubt obsessional, is not. It's often quite similar. There are always distortions that lead up to these doubts, or reasoning tricks, as we often call them in ICBT, that the OCD uses to lead up to an obsessional doubt and make it real to the person. Even though these obsessional doubts or obsessions are always completely irrelevant and unnecessary. They're wrong, they're false. So, and it's because of this that it can actually be resolved entirely, like I talked about before. When you see them as not as intrusions that just happen, but as incorrect conclusions, then they can be resolved. And treatment is therefore also focused on seeing through these reasoning tricks of the OCD in order to resolve your doubt and see it for what it really is.
That's powerful, right? So addressing the doubt, the rest of the cycle isn't happening for people. And
exactly, yeah.
So building on that a little bit, central concept in ICBT is this very fancy word, inferential confusion. I'm hoping you can explain a little bit about what inferential confusion is and how does it occur?
Yeah, so inferential confusion is really the core cognitive mental state of OCD. And it occurs, and this may sound a little bit complicated, but it occurs when an imagined possibility or an abstract idea is confused with an actual probability. So probability meaning here something that can actually be known through the senses or direct experience, and imagined possibilities which are infinite and often entirely irrelevant to the here and now. And what OCD does, it elevates completely irrelevant abstract possibilities to something that feels like it needs to be taken seriously. And it does that through reasoning and imaginative distortion. So in that sense, inferential confusion is an outcome of these reasoning and imaginative distortions. And it's a central idea in IGBT that fuels the entire OCD cycle, because once an imagined possibility is treated as real, anxiety, compulsions, and reassurance seeking follow from that. And the whole entire OCD is maintained by this confusion between reality and imagination, right? And ICBT targets directly this confusion. It helps clients identify when this shift into the imagination occurs, when they go from reality into the obsessional doubt, they get absorbed into the obsessional doubt, which is part of this confusion. You get absorbed because you confuse what is really just an abstract possibility, no relevance to the here and now, with something that you think may have relevance, even though it does not. And once you break through that, and once the person can see that the doubt was built entirely on imagination and nothing else, the obsession no longer feels valid or necessary. They are nothing more than irrelevant possibilities that do not deserve your attention or consideration. And once you see that, there's also no need for anxiety and compulsions anymore. So realization and insight is really key in the treatment, not confrontation, fear confrontation through exposure. If something is not real, there's nothing to expose yourself to, right? So, and that's a principle that we follow in ICBT.
Yeah, it kind of falls like a house of cards, right?
Right.
Once you see it for what it is, it's amazing. In your Resolving OCD books that you've written recently, you introduced the idea of the inner and outer wheel of OCD. Can you explain what these are and how they interact?
Yeah, so these are metaphors we use, but it's also a model of OCD. The inner wheel represents the principal driver of OCD that turns the outer wheel. So the outer wheel represents the more apparent, observable symptoms, starting with obsessional doubt, and then also everything that follows from it, like compulsions, avoidance, reassurance seeking, mental reviewing, and rumination. But all these behaviors are reactions to the distress that is caused by the inner wheel. And the inner wheel is really the core mechanism that generates and sustains the OCD. And it's composed of three main elements, which is the obsessional narrative, which is the story that leads up to the obsessional doubt, the reasons behind the obsessional doubt, justifications for it, the reasoning distortions, process and imaginative distortions I talked about earlier. It consists of often we see a distrust of the senses, a dismissal of the senses during reasoning, an over-reliance on the imagination. Imagination starts to take over as soon as you start distrusting what you really see and sense. It starts to override perception. Not that you don't perceive correctly. People with OCD perceive fine. There's not a problem with perception. It's when imagination starts to override what they actually see and what they sense and what they already know. And also the misapplication of reality-based information. People may say, well, I experienced this in the past, so therefore this and this could now happen. But these things don't automatically make it relevant in the here and now if there's no indication in reality in the here and now that there's anything wrong. OCD uses all that to make the obsessions real. And again, like I said, to elevate what are really abstract possibilities into a real probability. Then the third element of the inner wheel would be the feared possible self, as we call it, which is the person we fear we might be or might become. And this often determines the specific theme that the person has obsessions about. So the outer wheel is really a response to the inner wheel. And traditional therapies generally focus only on the outer wheel. ICBT really focuses on the inner wheel, the source of the obsession, everything that drives the things in the outer wheel. And that's also why it's the main target in the treatment of ICBT, these three principal elements. And we don't ignore the outer wheel, but it's not essential in ICBT in order to overcome OCD. What is really considered specific to OCD is what happens in the inner wheel.
Mm-hmm. I think that's powerful because you really dismantle the OCD and what maintains it. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the feared possible self. How does the feared possible self and ICBT differ from the ERP concept of a core fear?
Yeah, so like I said, feared possible self, as we call it in ICBT, is one of the factors involved in the production of obsessional doubt. And as I said, it typically determines the theme, the specific theme that you have obsessions about. And it refers to an imagined identity. It's not real. It's something you fear you might be or might become, such as being immoral, dangerous, or irresponsible. It's often what you think the obsession says about yourself. So it's your self-concept, right? And a core fear, as in ERP, is far less clearly defined than the idea of a feared possible self. It's defined much wider. It doesn't even necessarily refer to identity or self, right? A core fear can be about anything. It's a fear without any further specification as to what it may be about and not automatically linked to the self. It also often refers to feared outcomes of the obsessional doubt. Like I may get ill if I am contaminated. The doubt is I might be contaminated. The consequences, I might get ill, or I might be a bad person, might go to jail, then maybe the core fear is going to jail. But in ICBT, we only really look at everything that happens before that, you know. And the fear itself would in general be considered something that actually precedes the occurrence of the obsessional doubt, not something that comes after. And it's also other important distinction I think to make is that's also core fears are also treated entirely different as in comparison to ERP or in comparison to ICBT. In ERP, the person is often exposed to their core fears to learn to tolerate, to habituate, to learn something new, right? In ICBT, you don't expose a person to the fear itself. It would not make any sense because you would be exposing the person to something that's not real. The goal is not to accept or tolerate your feared self. It's to dismantle it. It's not a real thing. It's not something to make friends with either. You know, it serves no particular function except to make life miserable. And it's an illusion, like the obsessional doubt itself, not something you need to confront or get used to in any way. And by doing that, by conceptualizing it that way, which I think is the reality to start with, it also far better allows the person to actually connect with their authentic self, which is also something we look a lot in. We look a lot at in ICBT to get the person back to who they really are, and to see that there's no justification in their self for any of the obsessions that they experience.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the things I love most about ICBT, right? We don't have to tolerate or accept or expose ourselves to someone that we're not.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not reassurance, right? I mean, if you
Mhm.
come sort of from a forward model of development, you sort of start thinking, well, that sounds like reassurance, that actually, but it's not. You're stating reality, right? And there's nothing, if something states reality, then that is not reassurance. Now, if you constantly need reassurance, then that you can make it compulsive. Anything can be made compulsive, right?
Mhm.
But stating reality in itself is not a problem.
Since ICBT is an effective evidence-based treatment for OCD, some of our viewers want to know, can ICBT be applied to other conditions beyond OCD, such as depression and anxiety?
Well, so ICBT is specifically designed, was specifically developed for OCD and closely related disorders. And it specifically targets obsessional doubt, right? So it focuses on how people reason themselves into doubt. So it was not developed as a standalone treatment for depression or things like generalized anxiety. And also these conditions also involve different cognitive distortions. So if you would do cognitive therapy with these other treatments, you would be more likely to address these other cognitive distortions first, like catastrophization, maybe all or nothing thinking. And ICBT quite specifically focuses on this process of inferential confusion, which has been shown in research to be quite specific to OCD. So it would not immediately be suitable. I would not recommend it, not until you do other first-line treatments for anxiety and depression first. That's not to say that some principles of ICBT could still be useful in these treatments. For example, stepping out of an imaginary narrative and reconnecting with reality. I think that's something that could apply to many different conditions involving anxiety and depression. But these would be then supportive techniques. It's not a full treatment model that you would use for these conditions in the form of providing ICBT only.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for answering that. For clinicians or therapists, because we have some of those people in our audience today, people who are interested in learning how to provide ICBT, what do you recommend as a good starting point?
We have a website. It's called ICBT Online. I think it's also in the description on the website of the ADAA. Has a lot of resources, also resources for clients as well, by the way, in terms of finding a therapist. We have a lot of videos explaining how the therapy works, all by volunteers who have contributed to the website and its content. I would also advise, well, obviously, I would advise read the Resolving OCD series, right? It really provides a very accessible way of understanding ICBT, also in a very detailed manner at the same time, yet accessible, at least I hope so. And it addresses many of the concepts that we're talking about here. In general, if you are a therapist and you want to learn about ICBT, my advice in general will be immerse yourself into it. Really immerse yourself into it in every way that you can. It takes a while to get the entire model, but many therapists who have really immersed themselves in it have let me know that they really found it beneficial in learning the model to fidelity, right? So it's never just one thing. It's not just follow a training and that's it. Trainings are useful, but you cannot learn ICBT in one workshop. That's just not how it works. You need to also apply it. I would also advise to seek consultation as part of learning learning ICBT. So there are many different things that I would advise to do at the same time. But the overlapping goal of immersion into all different kinds of aspects of ICBT. I should also mention we have a Facebook group for mental health professionals. So I would also definitely advise, which can be found on the website and how to join it. Which also is very helpful. We have a large community, 5,000 members, mental health professionals, almost 5,000 right now. So.
And always good questions.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there are so many people whose lives are impacted by OCD. What do you wish people experiencing OCD knew that could really support their recovery?
I think it's important to understand that whatever doubt or obsession you have is not random. It doesn't mean it's real. It's not real, but it is constructed. So it arises from a specific reasoning process. So it's not just a reaction to thoughts. It's built up through imagination and a certain internal logic, and that's a hopeful message. Because if it was constructed, can be deconstructed, right? You're not stuck with doubt forever. Recovery means resolving doubt, and you don't necessarily have to learn to live with it or manage it, right? Nor do you have to learn to live with uncertainty, which is a different concept, which is a different concept. Things are uncertain, but that does not apply to obsessional doubt. It's constructed differently. Also, another message is like what people with OCD sometimes feel is like, I'm broken. You're not broken. Nor are you irrational in those type of terms. People with OCD are often quite intelligent. They just got tricked by the OCD, because that's what OCD does. OCD tricks them into believing something is real while it's not. But it's not because you're broken or because you're meant to have OCD for the rest of your life. And you can reconnect with what you already know. Many of these things, people with OCD already in the background, they know that it doesn't make sense what OCD does to them. Just they can't put their finger on it. What is happening exactly? Why do you all fall for this all the time? IGBT tries to show you why you fall for it, so that you have the tools in order to stay out of the bubble that OCD creates.
Right, because people don't have OCD about everything. It's about specific things and
Exactly.
being able to see that.
Yeah, that's something that we often talk about in ICBT, right? The selectivity of the doubt. You don't worry about everything. You don't have obsessional doubts about everything in your life. That means you already know that something is not correct when it comes to OCD and how it tries to convince you there's a problem when there's not, when you don't have it in every area. So you already have the tools in a way. And ICBT likes to remind you of that you already know that the OCD is wrong, as well as the obsession.
Yeah, I think, again, such a hopeful message to people. Another question we had from the audience is, if your feared consequence of the obsession has happened multiple times, can ICBT still be effective?
Yes, definitely. ICBT can still be effective. It does not depend on whether a feared event has or has not happened. ICBT focuses on how obsessional doubt is constructed in the here and now. So the core issue is really the reasoning process that led up to it. So even if something happened before, when you have an obsessional doubt in the here and now, in the moment, it's still being generated by the same distortions, the same imaginative and reasoning distortions. So in that sense, sometimes people talk about real event OCD, right? But it's sort of a misleading concept, and I've talked about this before in other settings. And it's very unfortunate, because just because an event has occurred, it doesn't mean the obsessional doubt is always about something different than the exact event. It's about doubting something that may have occurred because of that event, or that it somehow provides a justification for the doubt that you have in the here and now, or the doubt that you may have had in the past. And it makes people feel as if they're different, that their OCD cannot be resolved because of that. It's not. It's exactly the same process. There's never anything real about obsessional doubt, and the same goes for real event OCD. There's only one form of OCD, and that's OCD.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you for answering that. We have some time, I think, to maybe begin answering some questions from the audience that is live today.
We
Or would
do.
you like?
Yeah, I was gonna say we have quite a few that have come in.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the first one here. This is a question from Nora. And Nora asks, what do you suggest for clients who do not like doing the written homework exercises?
Well, my question to that would be why? Well, what is the particular problem with the written exercise? That can sometimes be can sometimes be can actually be an obsession sometimes, or a doubt that stands in the way. So I think you first need to ask yourself, why do I have problems with it? And from there, then you can have a little bit of a better idea on how to resolve that, you know. But written exercises, I think engagement is the important thing. How you do that doesn't always matter, right? So as long as you engage with material, and the form in which you do that can vary, you know, then there are different ways that you can address it. It's not mandatory to, if you have a real problem with written exercises, it's not mandatory to do it, as long as you do engage with the material, you know, that is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I can vouch that you can do ICBT without having to write down every homework assignment, and working on that within a session can be just as powerful. So
And also I should add, there are a lot of exercises in the books, right?
yes.
But it also has a lot of examples that may be relevant to you and not to others, you know. Use the material that works the best for you, you know. But again, do immerse yourself. That is important. You cannot just read something and expect a change to come through that alone. You know, you have to engage with material.
Yeah, and I enjoy that there's that flexibility. It's not like you have to do this assignment first and this assignment next. It's what is relevant and valuable that still adheres to the model and the important insights that you need to make towards
Exactly.
recovery.
Yeah.
All right, we have another question. This is from an anonymous attendee. And the question is there any evidence that this approach is effective for individuals with co-occurring OCD and ASD, or autism spectrum disorder? Are there any adaptations required?
In terms of actual trials where we specifically focus on OCD co-occurring with ASD, no, we don't have evidence in those terms, right? That would be we're limited by funding from government to do trials, right? So we generally look at general populations of OCD, but I mean with the trials we don't necessarily exclude people who are neurodivergent. So they're part of that population that we treat. But in terms of hard empirical evidence, where we specifically looked at those populations where it co-occurs, OCD and autistic spectrum disorders, you know, that's not something we have looked at. But I think there's reason to assume, given that OCD or given that ICBT addresses common processes underlying OCD, right? There's no reason to assume that could not also work well for folks with autism, you know, or folks who are autistic. And we also get those messages from the field where people say, no, ICBT works quite well and it is naturally quite inclusive. So I don't think adaptations are needed for it specifically, but you do need to meet clients on their own terms all the time, right? So you do need to be sensitive for any issues that come along with any specific population, whether it's LGBTQ plus, but any sort of minority population. So that you do need to be sensitive to, you know. But ICBT, in terms of treating OCD, there's no specific reason to assume it would not be effective or less effective, right? But it's definitely not a treatment for autism. So let's be clear about that, right? So,
OCD.
okay.
Yeah. I think we have another question. This is also from an anonymous attendee. Sometimes OCD makes you feel like you're doubting before you can even get the words out. When doubt is that deep and quick to come, how do we regain trust in our true self?
It's difficult, right? Because OCD is lightning quick, right? It can be real quick. It catches you by surprise. The obsessional doubt, I mean, we're saying it's not just an intrusive thought, but obsessional doubt can be very intrusive, right? So it can suddenly hit you out of nowhere. And then before you know it, you're in it already. You're in it, what we call this OCD bubble, right? So, and that's something we pay a lot of attention to in ICBT by slowing this process down, straight from the beginning of treatment all the way to the end, you know. And we have specific exercises for that to slow down this process of how you sort of constantly move into the OCD so quickly and get so quickly overwhelmed by it, you know. We do things like sequencing exercises, which is just watching your OCD, watching the OCD happening, how you react to it with your anxiety, with your compulsion, without changing anything at that moment, but just being able to create a little bit of distance and slow that process down, you know. That leaves a little bit more space and room to already to start working with the OCD, not just in the situation, but also outside of it. You know, we usually start outside of situations, but later on you can also like learn how to slow that process down when you're in the middle of the OCD. You know, we have exercises that include what we call carrier thoughts. These are little thoughts that happen just before the obsessional doubt takes hold. Nobody's just triggered, right? Nobody's just triggered and then has an obsessional doubt. Now, there's something that links the trigger, or what we call a trigger. It's really a prompt, because for people without OCD, it's not a trigger, right? It's really a prompt in your environment, or that you're thinking something, or some sort of inner perception that links. There's a thought that usually occurs that links it with the obsessional doubt. So there are many steps in between before an obsessional doubt occurs, even though experientially it seems to happen all at once, you know. But once you break it down, we try to find that space in between so that you can be ahead of it before it even occurs. And once you do, then there's room for trusting yourself again as well, you know, because then you create a moment of choice, right? There's more of a choice happening. It's no longer is just this thing as something that's just happening to me. It's something where you say like, okay, wait a second. There is something here that I can have a little bit of handle and control over. And we try to build upon that and make that stronger and stronger in order for the OCD not to overwhelm you to the extent that it does now.
Yeah. Not reasoning your way into it.
Exactly.
Right?
A lot of it, we don't, it's not about reasoning your way out of the OCD, it's about learning to not reason your way into it, you know? And that requires slowing things down quite a bit.
Thank you for that answer.
And thank you for the question.
Let's see, we have another question from a lot of anonymous attendees. What is the role of an individual's sense of self within this approach, and how is it fostered in treatment? I think we talked a lot about, you know, what the feared possible self is. On the other side of this, what is the role of an individual's sense of self within ICBT?
Right. So we have the feared self, right? We have the feared self. That's the person you fear being or might be. And like I said, it's an imagined self. It's an illusion created by the OCD. It's not a real thing. But then you also have the actual self. Who are you really, right? And often people with OCD already know. It's just that the OCD makes them doubt who they really are, right? So if you would ask a person with OCD, well, who are you really, you know? Just forget about the OCD for a moment. Who do you think, what does your common sense tell you who you really are, you know? And usually there's already some access to it, and that is their authentic self. Now, OCD can be very overwhelming, I should say, in the sense that OCD always tries to remove yourself from your authentic self, from who you really are. It makes you doubt it. So if you're really in the OCD, then you feel like, oh my God, my self is no longer there. Like, who am I? I don't no longer know, you know? But that's the OCD that has removed you from it. It doesn't mean that your authentic self is not there, you know? It's just you temporarily lost touch with it, you know. And in order to get you back to that, we first have to dismantle the OCD itself, and then the authentic self will become more accessible, and you can actually live your life as who you truly are, you know, while feeling grounded and connected in your real sense of self and your authentic self.
It's a lovely thing to restore in someone. Next question. Another anonymous attendee. How do you treat a client who has improved but remains stuck in compulsive avoidance due to the traumatic experiences in the bubble? And a second part to that question, is this a form of PTSD?
Yeah, so being in OCD, right? It is one of the most horrible and unpleasant things that there is. When you're in deep entranced and you have moved into this bubble, you know. On the other hand, it's not real. It's a terrible thing, and the feelings are very overwhelming, but it is not real, you know. Is that a form of traumatic experience? Well, I mean, it certainly is something that can overwhelm and hard to come to terms with. But I think that the message remains the same. You are entering an illusion when you're going into OCD. So maybe the question to ask is, why was it traumatic? You know, why was it traumatic? Because if you go into this bubble of the OCD, and you may have experienced certain intrusions and images, yeah, they are very unpleasant, but they're not really part of you. They are not who you are, you know? So I think the question is to ask, like, if you still experience that as compulsive, maybe, or if you still feel that you're stuck in the bubble, maybe you're still giving some credence to the obsessional doubt that set this emotion to start with, you know. So ICBT will always try to go back to the obsessional doubt that occurs before you get into the bubble, or even before that, when we look at the narrative, you know. So if you say, I still have compulsive behaviors, that means you still sometimes enter that bubble, right? Because you would not if you would consider the doubt completely irrelevant, you know. So, and maybe then, if you really do step out of the bubble, then by seeing the OCD for what it is, will also be a little bit less traumatic, because it will appear to you as more of the illusion that it really is, as something that is not real.
Thank you. We have so many more questions. I'm going to try and get through some additional ones. This one is from Amy, and Amy asks, what if the obsessional reasoning is focused on a future feared consequence, not something happening in the here and now?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tricky, right? Usually we ask ourselves in IGBT, what has to be true in the here and now for that future event to occur? And what is the real obsession? The obsessional doubt is not so much like the future event, but it is what you think has to be true for that future event to occur. So a particular thing, if, for example, I'm just taking an example, I don't know whether it applies here, but that's something we often see in practice. What, for example, with scrupulosity, OCD, what if the person says, what if I go to hell, you know, after I die, right? Well, obviously that's a future event, right? But ICBT would ask, like, okay, how did you arrive at that idea? You know, it would ask, like, what has to be true to go to hell? And then usually you start getting a little bit closer to the obsessional doubt itself. And it could be something, well, maybe I've sinned, I did a terrible thing, perhaps, you know, that's all relevant to the here and now. And once you resolve that particular doubt, then these feared consequences fall away naturally as well, you know, because you take away the reasoning that led up to it, right? So, so feared consequences in the future do not at all change anything in terms of the ability of IGBT to address it. That's because they're usually a consequence of something else.
Thank you. I'm going to get to some of these more of these questions. What do your long-term case studies, this is from Andrea, what do your long-term case studies look like that have been using ICBT 5 years, 10 years, et cetera? Is long sustained recovery the normal finding?
We don't actually have studies with that long follow-up. That's something that would be great to do, right? 5 or 10 years, and that may be something that we are going to do. Usually our follow-up in our trials is up to 1 year, But I am aware of studies that have looked at long-term follow-up, 5, 10 years, which included people also being treated with ICBT and a bunch of other treatment. And there tends to be a good follow-up of most or a good trajectory of most evidence-based treatments in terms of long-term recovery. If that occurs after treatment, then quite often that is maintained. Not for everyone, but in general, there's reason to assume that people, a significant proportion of people, maintains their gains after treatment. There's no reason to think ICBT is different.
Dr. Robbins, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Okay. All right. Let me see here. Try to get to the next one. This is another anonymous attendee. How do you deal with comorbidities during treatment? And the second part of that question, is it important to identify and treat them separately?
Yes. I mean, I think you also you have to look at them. Are there really comorbidities, or are they sort of part or a consequence of the OCD, right? That's the first question to look at for any clinician. For example, a person may present with both depression and OCD. Then the first question would be, in my mind, is that depression the result of having OCD, or is something that exists separately from it, right? So, and if it does exist separately from it, yeah, then it requires a separate treatment approach, right? So this is all about assessment, and it goes for many different comorbidities. So sometimes you have to address them concurrently. Sometimes one is a consequence of the other, and sometimes they're entirely distinct. But that requires careful clinical conceptualization in order to establish that, and you adapt your treatment plan based on that.
Mm-hmm. Andrea asks, would love to expand awareness of ICBT in the United States. Andrea says they've had huge success with their OCD recovery using ICBT and wanting to help spread this awareness so that therapy is more accessible to those experiencing OCD. So glad that that's been your experience, Andrea.
It's great. Well, congratulations. I'm very happy that it helped for you, Andrea. I mean, we're doing already a lot on dissemination, right? We have these sort of webinars, we have a website, but we definitely want to expand upon that by doing more of these activities, right? What you can do yourself. I mean, IOCDF has different advocates, right? People with OCD with lived experience who provide testimony as to what treatments that has worked for them, So those will be outlets, perhaps, to look into if that's something you would be interested in. There's also Facebook groups for people with OCD, specific to ICBT as well, So we're spreading awareness through that as well, which is great. So those were some of the avenues I would look at. I have to say, the awareness in the US is growing quite a bit already. We have a lot of clinicians. I think we need more clinicians, but it's also about bringing it to the people with OCD. I think that awareness, there's still a lot of room there for awareness to grow, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book, right? To get it to people directly with OCD.
Well, we are so grateful that you wrote these books and all that you've done for the OCD community. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today, Dr. Aardema.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here, and thank you, Diana and Jolie, for moderating and hosting today. That's great.